Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Anupam.
Ciao. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, who's Samiksha is here?
She is here. Yes, I spoke with her.
Hi. Okay. Wish you a very good year, Reshma.
Thank you. Same to you and everybody on call.
Assemble, shall we?
Yes, sir. Good to go.
Okay. And the participants are there?
Yes, they've been joining in.
Acha, I don't seem to have. Oh, I don't seem to have any idea of where the participants are. How many are there just now?
We have 36 participants active with us.
So we don't have access to the chat and all, no? Oh yeah, we have.
So you do have, yes.
We have. Oh, good. 38. Fine. This number is rising steadily. So I think with your permission, Reshma, is it okay if we commence the talk?
Of course. Yes.
Excellent. All right. So very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Italian Art History Lecture Series with Reshma Nair, Dr. Reshma Nair. I wish you all a very happy new year. And today we begin with Giovanni Bellini. And it's a work on panel, that means on wood. And we request Reshma Nair to take us on the journey with this painting this time.
Sure.
Welcome, Reshma.
So, good evening, everybody. Just bear with me while I open my PowerPoint and share the screen. Just one sec. Yeah, okay, I do have it open. So I seem to have lost the screen. Just one moment.
Well, in the meantime, for those of you who are, just to give a little introduction about panel paintings until Dr. Reshma Nair tells me that the
Thank you,
screen is
Anupam.
ready. Okay.
If you don't mind, just one sec, Anupam, I'm going to just leave the webinar and join again because I can't find
Okay,
this.
that's fine.
Oh, wait, I think I see it now. I do see it now. Sorry, go ahead.
If you're ready, Reshma, I'll not speak then.
Okay, I am ready.
Okay, then let's perfect. Here we go.
All right. Maybe in the Q&A session, it would be great if you could address the technical aspects.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So, all right. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes,
very
good for
clearly,
us.
very clearly.
Okay, great. So I'm going to begin. Okay. The painting I'm talking about today is the San Giobbe Altarpiece by Giovanni Bellini. Just one moment. Oh, I hit the wrong thing. Just one moment. And Giovanni Bellini is the most important Renaissance artist in Venice in the latter half of the 15th century. Okay, and he is the first Venetian artist to regularly use oil paint in his works. Many of them were on panel. Okay, so his student Titian would go on to do a lot of oil painting on canvas, and oil painting on canvas became a characteristic feature of Venetian Renaissance painting. So the altarpiece that we're looking at, the altarpiece of Saint Giobbe, is oil painting on panel. It's an early Venetian Renaissance altarpiece. It's an enormous painting. It has been slightly trimmed from its original dimensions. And as of now, it's about 15 feet high. So you get a sense of how enormous the painting is. Now, before we go further, I'll just very quickly write out in Hindi the pronunciations. So these are pretty straightforward. Saint Giobbe, so the word for saint is son, and Giobbe in Italian. Okay, so San Giobbe and Giovanni Bellini, the artist. Now, when we talk about altarpieces, in any church, there are multiple altars, but there's only one high altar. Okay? And usually, the subject of the high altarpiece is directly connected to the dedication of the church. So in the Church of Saint Giobbe, and this altarpiece was created for the Church of Saint Giobbe in Venice, you should expect that the high altarpiece, the main altar in the church, would have an altarpiece sculpted or painted, referencing and depicting Saint Giobbe. Oddly enough, this was not created as a high altarpiece for the church. It is an altarpiece. It was the most lavish and important altarpiece of the church, but it was placed on a side wall. And in this lecture, I'm going to focus I'm going to focus the lecture on the reason why, even though we would expect this would have been the high altarpiece of the church, it was not the high altarpiece. Okay, having said that, I would like to speak a little more about a very little more about the support panel. So as Anupam mentioned, this is, I don't know why that's moving on its own. This painting is oil on wooden panel. Excuse me, just one sec. And the characteristic feature of oil painting is that oil painting can be applied in multiple layers of glazes. Okay, and that when it is done by a master artist, the artist is able to represent in a very realistic manner light and space in a manner that is much more convincing, more lifelike than in other media like tempera. Okay, so as I mentioned, this altarpiece was originally created for and placed in the nave of the Church of Saint Giobbe in Venice, not the high altar, but one of the lateral altars, and it is currently in a museum. Okay. The type of composition in which the Madonna and Child are flanked by saints is called a sacra conversazione. This is an Italian term. It's a modern term, which simply translates simply as holy conversation. Very simple reason for that. So the figures you see represented in this altarpiece, the Madonna and Child, and I will go into the details and show you who all are there. There are 6 saints and 3 musician angels. The 6 saints, some of them historical figures, lived in different eras. Okay, so Saint Sebastian on the right with the arrow in his lower abdomen is a 3rd or 4th century saint. Saint Job is an Old Testament saint, so he lived even before Christ was born. And to the left of Saint Job, you can, if you look carefully, you'll see the figure of Saint John the Baptist, who is the cousin of Christ, so a contemporary of the Virgin Mary and Christ. So this composition in which different saints from different time periods are all positioned in a common unified space with the Virgin and Child is called a sacra conversazione. Now, I do not know why my slides are jumping on their own, so forgive me, I might have to move back sometimes. So from left to right, extreme left, let me just zoom in on the figures. This figure is Saint Francis of Assisi, whose followers are known as the Franciscans. And his attributes are the stigmata or the wounds of Christ, which through his devotion appeared on his body without him being physically wounded because of his contemplation and meditation on the Passion of Christ. The stigmata of Christ also appeared on his body. So he points to the wound on his side, and there's also a wound on his hand, okay? Echoing the wounds of Christ. Okay? To his right, the bearded figure you see here is Saint John the Baptist. And if you look very carefully, you'll see just above Saint Francis's head, where my pointer is, a staff, a cross-shaped shepherd's staff made actually of twigs, which is an attribute of Saint John the Baptist. And to their right is the figure of Saint Job. Saint Job was the patron saint of the poor, and especially of the plague-stricken. Okay. I'm just going to jump for a moment to Saint Sebastian, who is pierced by the arrows, another plague saint. Okay. So this altarpiece was commissioned just a few years after an outbreak of plague in Venice, and the Church of Saint Job, for which it was commissioned, was attached to a hospital that served the poor. So the choice of Saint Sebastian makes perfect sense in this altarpiece. Saint Job, of course, because it's the Church of Saint Job. Then you have the Madonna and Child enthroned, raised above the other figures. At the foot of the throne, you have 3 angels playing musical instruments. And this is just a side note. Bellini was famed for his the accuracy with which he depicted musicians and musical instruments. So this is not him just positioning actors or models holding the instruments. They're apparently they are holding them in a very accurate manner, just the way real musicians would. Then to the right of the Madonna and Child, you have Saint Dominic, who is reading a book. Saint Sebastian, I've already mentioned, and the rightmost figure in a bishop's mitre with a bishop's crozier is Saint Louis of Toulouse, who was historically the Bishop of Toulouse. I mentioned that this is a unified space. If you compare the altarpiece of Saint Job with another altarpiece that we see on the right, which is a few decades earlier, and the central figure of this altarpiece is Saint Bernardino da Siena, a Franciscan preacher, okay, who had visited Venice, preached in the Church of Saint Job, and actually stayed in the convent attached to the church, though this altarpiece was created for a different church. Now, in this altarpiece, you see 3 saints. You know, their sizes and proportions are more or less in relation to each other, but each of them is positioned in an individual compartment. The individual compartments have Renaissance features. So you have pilasters that are topped by classicizing capitals. So, oops, just one second. These, you have rounded arches, and you have a depiction of realistic perspective or recession into space. Each of the saints stands on a podium which appears to protrude outwards towards the viewer's space. Okay. Now, if you compare the altarpiece of Saint Giobbe on the left and leave aside the fact that it is much larger, just think in terms of it's a composition of saints, and all the saints are positioned in a unified space. Okay, so the space you're looking at, the illusionistically rendered space that Giovanni Bellini has painted on this altarpiece, is a semicircular apse with a semicircular dome, and it is fronted by a barrel vault. Okay, so this is the barrel vault, the kind of vault you would imagine if in the altarpiece on the right, these arches were just extended backwards. They would form barrel vaults. But the point of view is that of someone standing below and looking up, because you can see the interior of the barrel vault in the altarpiece of Saint Giobbe. Okay. I will come back to the depiction of space in the altarpiece, but I want to just point out one very important feature. Excuse me, I do not know why this is jumping on its own. Of this altarpiece. So you have very obviously Renaissance architecture, a Renaissance space in which these there is an asynchronous grouping of various saints with the Virgin and Child. And in the semi-dome of the apse, you can see a representation of mosaics. Okay, there is a Latin inscription celebrating the Virgin, and there's a specific type of angel depicted, okay, with a certain number of wings. And if you look very carefully, you'll also see feet coming out. Okay, now the representation here is not of a painting, it is painted, but it represents a mosaic decoration of the type that you would find in Venice in the Cathedral of St. Mark. Okay, more importantly, behind the throne of the Virgin and Child, you can see a representation of veined marble cladding on the wall. Okay, this combination of angels of this sort with the legs, because that's quite unusual to have the seraphim with the wings and the legs in a mosaic background, and this kind of marble cladding on the rear wall of the chapel are taken from one of the chapels in the Basilica of St. Mark. Okay. The reason for that will come to in a short while. Just one second. How do I get out of the Zoom? Okay. Yeah. The figure of Saint Bernardine or San Bernardino da Siena is a historical figure who would very much have been in the living memory of Giovanni Bellini and his contemporaries, because the saint had visited Venice. He was a famed preacher who went across the length and breadth of Italy preaching, and enormous crowds flocked to hear his sermons. Okay. When he stayed in the Church of St. Giobbe and preached at the Church of St. Giobbe, he was in contact with a very close Venetian noble, friend of his was a Venetian nobleman, a person called Cristoforo Moro. Now, San Bernardino predicted that Cristoforo Moro would one day be elected doge or duke, the leader of Venice. And 20 years later, after San Bernardino had died, that actually came to pass. And that had a significant impact on the interior decoration of the Church of St. Giobbe and the location of the altarpiece. Okay, we'll come back to that. Now, the other figure that I want you to look at carefully, just one moment, is the one on extreme right, also a representation of Saint Louis of Toulouse. So he holds his attributes, the bishop's crozier, and he wears the bishop's mitre. This mitre is not as simple as the one in the altarpiece of St. Giobbe. It is bejeweled, and his robes are lavishly embroidered and have a border with saints depicted on them. Now, the Virgin and Child are seated much higher than everybody else. The Virgin has her left hand raised in what is called an orans gesture, a gesture of prayer. Okay, and the Christ Child is seated on her lap. Neither of them looks out directly at the viewer. In fact, none of the saints in the altarpiece look out at the viewer either. Okay, so the gazes are abstracted. What I want you to note is the throne behind the Virgin is topped by this roundel with floral decorations. I'll come back to that. Okay, my controls on for some reason are acting up. I apologize for that. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to avoid zooming in because that seems to be, for some reason, creating issues. The musician angels, okay, are seated on stairs in front of the throne. And if you look in the center here, I wanted to zoom in, but I'm not going to do it simply because it seems to create problems and I lose time. What Bellini has painted is fictive, a fictive cartellino, a fictive piece of paper with an inscription on it, which is actually his signature. It's his name in Italian, Johannes Bellinus. Okay, so that's right here in the center beneath the foot of the angel in green. Okay, on the right, you see Saint Dominic absorbed in reading, Saint Sebastian, who is pierced by the arrow. Please look at the arrow very carefully, okay? Because it is, I am convinced, the highlight of this work, if not one of the highlights. I would say the highlight. The way it has been represented as if it is sticking out of his stomach, okay? And suspended in the space, not suspended, but it is surrounded by let me just go ahead one moment and show you an image. Yes, so if you look at the image on the left, right, I mean, where you see this arrow that punctures his leg and his abdomen, and you don't pay too much attention, but when you look at the close-up, and I assume when you look at it in person, this arrow appears truly three-dimensional, as if it is much further away from the hands of Saint Dominic, and there is air, space between and around the saint and the arrow. A close-up of the three saints on the left contrasted with the three saints on the right. I've identified them, so I won't go over that again. I would ask you now to look at the border of the extreme right, Saint Louis of Toulouse, over here. So this is Saint Louis of Toulouse. Look at his the edge of his robe, and I am going to try and zoom in here because it's important. So note that in this altarpiece, the two figures who are semi-nude are Saint Job and Saint Sebastian. Both of them are the plague saints, so with skin disease, but their skin looks perfectly pristine, apart from being pierced by arrows in the case of Saint Sebastian. So in terms of theology, this is representing the saints at a time after they have lived their physical lives and been redeemed, and they are now in I would say unsullied bodies. Okay, in the case of Saint Sebastian, the presence of the arrows is a reminder of his an attempt to kill him, despite which he did not lose faith in God. So I will speak in a moment about the two saints, their backgrounds. But as I mentioned, I want you to first just look at the border over here of the robe worn by Saint Louis of Toulouse. Okay, and the figure you see here is Saint Job. I'm sure if you look closely, which I have not been able to do, and I'm sure there is, all the other saints have been identified, but it's really very interesting to see Saint Job represented life-size as well as in miniature. Okay, about the two plague saints. So the story of Saint Job is that the Old Testament figure Job was a very wealthy man with a large family and very devout. God had no doubt of Job's devotion. And one day Satan had a conversation with God and claimed that Job was only devoted to God because he was wealthy and had a large family, because he had no sufferings. And God said, that's not the case. He is fundamentally devout. This is just incidental that he's also happy. So as a test, Job, as a test by Satan, not by God, God had no doubts about it. Job's family, Job lost his family, his money, he was reduced to poverty, and his faith in God did not waver. Okay, so Satan was still not convinced, and the next thing, Job had a terrible skin disease. So he had physical suffering in addition to the suffering of poverty. Okay, and he still did not waver in his devotion to God. Okay, so Job is a symbol of suffering Christians with deep piety who accept the will of God and do not lose faith in God because of their poverty or because of their health or other problems. As I mentioned, the Church of Saint Job, I'm not sure I mentioned this specific point, but when the structure was founded, okay, it was founded on a donation for a hospital to care for the poor. Okay, so Job was the obvious patron saint for such an endeavor. And the story of Saint Sebastian is a little different. He lived in the time of Emperor Diocletian. He was a believer in Christ. So Job lived before Christ. He is considered a saint because of his devotion to God. Sebastian was a believer in Jesus, so he was a Christian. And he was a soldier, and there was another soldier who was suffering from plague, who converted because of Sebastian, and he was miraculously cured of the plague. So ever since then, Sebastian has been associated, or rather, patients suffering from the plague have had a special devotion for Saint Sebastian. Now, Sebastian did not lose faith in God, but he was ordered to be put to death by being shot with arrows, but the arrows did not kill him. He survived them, and he was ultimately stoned or beaten to death. Okay, but the arrows are symbols of his suffering, and the fact that both Saint Job and Saint Sebastian are depicted without any terrible scars on their body refers to the fact that they have triumphed over physical misery and physical death. Okay, a photograph of the altarpiece today displayed in the museum. This is just to give you a sense of the scale of the figures. Okay, we'll look at an image, a composite image that places this photograph in the original frame of the church, which still exists. The original frame still exists. And keep in mind that the placement in the church was higher. So eye level would have been lower than the way you see it in this photograph. Okay. This is a photograph of the church as it is today. It was originally a Gothic structure, okay? And there's a long, complex history, which I will go over briefly. The key point here is that when you enter this church, so this, let me use the pointer. This is the main entrance, represented by this little line where my pointer is. So when you enter the church, this part where you see the number 15 is the high altar, okay? The principal altar of the church. And this is the church of Saint Job. So you would expect the altarpiece of Saint Job to be the high altarpiece of the church, because it would be placed at the high altar. Instead, it was placed over here where you see the number 2. Okay. Now, if you look at the layout of the church, you'll notice another thing. Because of constraints of space, remember that this building was built in the 14th century. I'm sorry, not this building, the original building. Then it was expanded, the complex was changed, there were changes made, and eventually this church was built. Okay, and keeping in mind the constraints at the time that the renovations were done, there are actual chapels on the left side of the nave, whereas on the right side, you just have a flat wall. Okay, and the altarpiece of Saint Job, let me just go ahead very quickly. This is a composite image of this part of the church. So the photograph you're looking at on the right is a photograph. The photographer is probably standing in the center here next to the number 4 and has taken this photograph. So you're looking at these two aedicules and the high altar space. Okay. Now let me go back. Yeah. Okay. I told you that Saint Bernardine of Siena was a key figure in the history of this church, and so was his friend Cristoforo Moro, who became the Duke of Venice. So I forgot, I should have mentioned this. This is just to lead up to that point. So in the 14th century, a hospital was founded, and it was dedicated to Saint Job. We know why it was dedicated to Saint Job. It made perfect sense. He was a plague saint, and he the poor had a special devotion to him. Okay, the daughter of the person who left the money to the church was continued looking after it, and she had quite a strong personality, and certain changes that were suggested or desired did not take place because she was not in favor of that. Okay, then in 1407, this church was entrusted to the Franciscans. Now, the Franciscans are members of the order founded by Saint Francis of Assisi. Now, when you think of the church as a Franciscan church, it comes as absolutely no surprise that you have St. Francis amongst the other saints in the altarpiece of St. Giobbe. Okay. When the daughter of the original founder died in 1447, by that time, Doge Cristoforo Moro, who had not yet become Doge, so Cristoforo Moro, a Venetian nobleman, had already made plans about what to do in the church. And we'll come to that very shortly. Okay. So Saint Bernardine of Siena was in Venice, preaching in the Church of St. Giobbe in the early 1440s. He died in 1444, and he was canonized very quickly. So by 1450, he was made a saint. Okay? So at this point, you have a saint who is not only of the Franciscan order, the church was now a Franciscan church, but also someone who in very recent years had stayed in the church and preached in the church. Okay. And it so happened that this saint was good friends with the man, Cristoforo Moro, who eventually became Doge of Venice in about 2 decades. When Cristoforo Moro became Doge, the first thing he did was to commemorate, to honor his esteemed friend, Saint Bernardine of Siena. And to that end, he had Bernardine of Siena declared a patron saint of Venice. Okay, so Venice has multiple patron saints. The most important patron saints of Venice are the Virgin and Saint Mark. So that's why you have the Basilica of Saint Mark. He's the patron saint of Venice. There are several other patron saints of Venice, but when Cristoforo Moro became the ruler of Venice, the leader of Venice, he also had Saint Bernardine of Siena declared a patron saint of Venice. Now, Venice had a very strong tradition of not having ducal tombs. Okay, so when a doge died, not having ducal tombs in St. Mark's Basilica. St. Mark's Basilica is attached to the ducal palace. Okay, but when the dukes, I'm sorry, I should not say dukes, when the doges died, they were buried in churches other than St. Mark's Basilica. The same thing happened with Cristoforo Moro, and he selected the Church of St. Giobbe. Okay, and this is where we come to the crux of the matter. But before that, one quick excursus, which you will see is pertinent. So this image is the exterior main entrance of the Basilica of St. Mark in Venice. Okay? And when you enter it, you look up and you are blinded almost by exquisite mosaic tiles. Okay? And the view we're looking at in the upper right is more or less if you were to enter the main entrance, walk down the nave and look up. So the principal dome is this one. So there are 2 domes here, the one behind it. When you looked up, this is the view you would get. And to the right, so the high altar would be beneath this arch or beyond this arch. And to the right of the high altar is a chapel to Saint Clement. Okay. In that chapel to Saint Clement, there are also mosaic decorations, and the mosaic decorations include seraphim or the 6-winged angels with feet, which is not a very normal characteristic. Okay. The chapel of Saint Clement honors Saint Clement, and on the altarpiece, Cristoforo Moro commissioned sculptures of Saint Mark, the patron saint of Venice, the patron saint of the Basilica, and Saint Bernardine of Siena to be placed. Okay, and they were placed. So bottom line, Cristoforo Moro elevated Saint Bernardine as a patron saint of Venice, and he had him honored in the most important church in Venice, that is the Basilica of Saint Mark. Now, he also made plans for his own tomb, and he selected the church of San Giobbe for his tomb. Okay. Oh, I didn't remember I had this image. So within this arch would be the chapel of Saint Clement. Now, the church of Saint Giobbe should have had as its high altarpiece the a painting or a sculpture honoring Saint Giobbe. And the Doge of Venice now wanted to be buried in this chapel, and he wanted to honor his friend, Saint Bernardine of Siena, in the church of Saint Giobbe. So he had a choice. He could have had any of the secondary or the lateral chapels dedicated to Saint Bernardine of Siena and had his tomb there, but instead he changed the dedication of the church by adding a dedication to Saint Bernardine. So instead of being just the church of Saint Giobbe, it became the church of Saint Bernardine and Saint Giobbe. And he left instructions and a considerable amount of money that Saint Bernardine was to be honored in the high altar, and his own tomb was to be placed, his own tomb, as in the Doge's own tomb, was supposed to be placed before the high altar. Okay. Now, eventually this was done, and the Doge died in about 1470, early 1470s. And about 10 years later, Giovanni Bellini was commissioned to create an altarpiece honoring the other and the original titular saint of the church, San Giobbe. And the altarpiece that we are looking at today takes into consideration the fact that Saint Giobbe is deserving of a much higher honor than simply a lateral altarpiece in the church that had been dedicated exclusively to him for a long time. And he was kind of, you could say, unceremoniously moved aside for because of the Doge's own friendship and personal devotion to Saint Bernardine of Siena. Okay, so now let's look at, on the left, you have the altarpiece as it is today, so disembodied from the frame and placed in the museum. And on the right, you have a composite picture. Okay, so it doesn't look like this anymore, but this is what it would have looked like originally when it was in situ. Okay, so the frame you're looking at in this photograph on the right is an architectural frame. Okay, that's not painted, that is stonework. Those pilasters, the arch, all of that is, it projects from the wall. Okay, and the space that is depicted inside responds to the physical architecture that frames it, even as it evokes the Basilica of Saint Mark. This is the most important point about this altarpiece, and it is very difficult to understand that unless you look at a photograph that reconstructs its original placement as in the photograph on the right. Okay, how exactly does it respond to the frame? So if you look on the left, you have just the altarpiece, and you see behind Saint Francis and behind Saint Louis of Toulouse the painted pilasters with capitals. So this is a close-up of the pilaster behind Saint Louis, another close-up. And what you see here on the left is I beg your pardon. What you see over here is the painted pilaster. What you see over here, this detail is the painted pilaster and the physical, actual pilaster of the frame. And you see how Bellini carefully calculated his composition so that the two seem, or rather the painted pilaster seems to continue the space that is initiated by the sculpted pilaster. Now, looking at the work in situ, if you look at it, facing it head on, it gives the impression of a chapel that extends backwards into space. But you know where this is located. You know it's a flat wall. There is no space. And the fictive space that is depicted with its mosaic apse, with the veined marble behind the throne, evokes Saint Mark, the Basilica of Saint Mark, the Cathedral of Saint Mark. So here there are better details of the mosaic. So this is a painted representation of the mosaic type of mosaics you would find in the Basilica of Saint Mark. And this is a painted representation of the veined marble and a painted representation of the pillar that echoes the physical pillar of the frame. Okay. Now, when you look at these images, it should be easy to understand what you're looking at. So you enter the church, so from this door, and so 2 bays, and the second one, if you turn, this is at the time the painting was in situ, you turned and looked, this is what you would see. So keep in mind, the Church of St. Giobbe, okay? You enter the Church of St. Giobbe, you do not find the altarpiece of St. Giobbe in the high altar as would be the norm. It's an exception, really unusual. And there's an unusual series of circumstances that led to this. And Giovanni Bellini's absolute, I would say, more than compositional genius is the manner in which he has honored St. Giobbe with an altarpiece that evokes the Basilica of St. Mark. And keep in mind, this was the most beautiful of the altarpieces in the church, and it was, by the time it was put into place, within a few years, guidebooks to Venice listed it as one of the extraordinary, beautiful works that visitors should have gone to see. Okay, so Bellini, beyond just the beauty of the figures or the way he has depicted space and texture, light, all of that, he has also created a composition that honors the saint to whom this church was originally dedicated. So with that, I finish the lecture. This is just a very, it's a synopsis of the chronology, which I could just, you could just take a moment to read. The main points I'll speak out. So Bernardine of Siena, a friend of a Venetian noble, was in this church in the 1440s. In 1450, he was canonized. Eventually, his friend was elected doge, and he had Bernardine of Siena honored in multiple ways, including by changing the dedication of the church from St. Giobbe to Bernardine and Giobbe, and ensuring that Bernardine of Siena was the high altar area was reserved for Bernardine of Siena and his own tomb, so the doge's tomb, because of which the altarpiece of St. Giobbe today is placed, or rather not today, today it's in a museum, was eventually placed on a side wall instead of where you would expect it to be on the high altar. Okay, so I'm ready to take questions.
Thank you very much.
Most welcome.
Here we are. So, okay, can you see me somewhere? Oh yeah, here we are.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Reshma, for this lovely insight into the panel painting. And one sec. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there are any questions that you have or comments, we'll take them on. We have 10 minutes, so please shoot. Let me see if there's something in the chat. Are all panel paintings done in situ? Virendra asks.
Done in situ? Actually, no, they're not. So even this painting would not have been done in situ. It would have been done in Bellini's studio and then placed. The term in situ means that it is still today in the place for which it was originally created. Okay, so it could be created in at spot X, but placed in spot Y, and if it's still in spot Y today, it's in situ. This is no longer in the Church of St. Giobbe, it's in the museum, so it is no longer in situ. Okay.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Reshma. I think that was important. And thank you for that question, Mr. Viren. Yes, ladies and gentlemen. Any general comments or anything, please. Everything that you comment enriches the rest of us also. So if there are no comments or questions at the moment, I'll just mention something in reference to. So Dr. Nair explained that this was an oil painting on panel. And that painting by Antonio Vivarini, Dr. Nair, was a tempera painting on panel, right? So, for example, the one that you told us, remember the one that you, that wonderful presentation on Botticelli's painting, that big painting? Yes, the La Primavera. That was tempera on panel, right? So just wanted to clarify for everybody, because there was no one else asking a question just now, is that so you have these oak, usually oak panels, planks of wood basically, which are then joined together. And then there's a cradle. There are these battens put at the back. There are these battens put at the back so that it remains in place and in position. And then over these panels, there is this layer of cloth that is applied. And over this cloth, there is this layer of chalk and glue, like rabbit glue, small animals, because the glue is medium in consistency. That ground is applied, and then it is smoothened, and then it is painted upon. If there is some gilding on it, gold foil, then that area is bathed, covered with a red ochre layer, and then fish glue is put on it, very thin fish glue, and then gold is applied, after which the painting starts. And in that panel paintings, usually the ones with tempera, that is usually egg tempera or egg white tempera often, in which they take the pigments and they mix it with that egg tempera, white of the egg, which is beaten. And then layers and millions of thin lines are applied to give it texture, tonality. And that is how that Vivarini, Antonio Vivarini panel painting was made. And what was very interesting was Dr. Nair mentioned that this one was actually with an oil painting, was painted in oil. So that means pigments with linseed oil. So the application is with brushes as layers, as Dr. Nair mentioned, that so many glazes you could put on it to give it that body and that tonality. So there are clear differences in the way panel paintings are made generally. One is with egg tempera, where the thin lines are used. Especially you see them in the icons that they used to make in the 4th century and 14th century and 15th century, even in the 12th century. And this one, on the contrary, was with oils. So painting with oils. That is how this was made. Just mentioning, Reshma, because now I think we have a few comments.
Okay, I'll just mention this since I've zoomed in now without an issue. Here is the signature of the artist.
Dr. Reshma, there are a few questions. Reshma, should I ask the questions? There are some questions in the chat.
Please do. Do you want me to
One
read
of them,
Yeah,
one of them says that, is the chapel empty today?
Is the chapel empty? No, it's not empty. So let me just show you the image. I think there is a crucifix. One sec. Yeah, there's a crucifix today. So this is the best image I have. There's a crucifix over here. There's no, I do not know in what way exactly Saint Bernardine of Siena was celebrated in the chapel. Okay, and I think the doge's tomb is somewhere where the photograph ends, right in front. So this is the view of the chapel. Anupam, if you're speaking, I can't hear you.
No, I'm not speaking. I'm quiet.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So now the next thing was, Vyom had mentioned, was it always for the side panel?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Yeah, even I didn't understand. So Vyom, do you want to ask this question? You said, was it always for the side panel? What was for the side panel?
I think I might understand. Is the question about, was the painting created for the
side wall? Side wall.
Yes, because by the time, it'll just be much easier if I go to the chronology and show you, it'll be very obvious. So 1480, the painting was created well after the doge had died. By the time the doge had died, he had already had the church rededicated and left instructions that his tomb was supposed to be in front of the high altar, which was supposed to honor Bernardine of Siena. So by the time Giovanni Bellini was commissioned to do the altarpiece of Saint Giobbe, it was for a
side wall,
for a location that was not, yes. And I would have to assume that they, actually, I should mention this. I don't know too much about it, but I have read references that there's another church in Venice, I don't remember which one it is, where I think it's Franciscans, or where they actually said that the second spot when you enter is the prized position. So there is this theory that that second spot had some significance to it, but that could just be a random thing.
Okay, so the number 15 is where the high altar is. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct. So think about the numbers. You enter a church, and at the opposite end, that's where your high altar is.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. It just so happens that in this key, the number 15 comes there.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There's one interesting question, and that sort of rounds up the talk. it says that what is that one significant element in the painting that you feel that would make this Giovanni Bellini's painting stand out, or him stand out from other painters in the Renaissance? There's something particular that he does that makes him stand out a bit, other than the musical
in Giovanni
instruments?
Bellini's technique, or in this specific painting? I don't get the question.
Yeah, either in the painting or in Bellini's technique.
So Bellini's use of oil, like his adoption of the medium of oil, was path-breaking for Venetian Renaissance painting. Okay, and he originally did religious works, but later on he also did mythological works, and some of his religious paintings have landscape backgrounds. And the way he was able to depict light, this is a characteristic feature of Venetian painting, but Bellini was one of the pioneers for that, because capturing and realistically depicting light is extremely difficult. Okay, it's easy to depict an, okay, I shouldn't say it's easy because I couldn't, but it is apparently much easier to depict an object with light and shadow falling on it. But depicting the light itself is a virtuoso task, and Bellini was a virtuoso at that. So that is one of the key elements of Bellini's art. In this work, like I told you, my personal the thing that really sticks out for me, a pun totally intended, is that arrow. I mean, it just seems to, it doesn't seem like the positioning of A in front of B in front of C. It seems like there is actually space there. That arrow is in the midst of space, and that's extraordinary.
Okay, and talking of light, there's this Shreyas says that was the painting of the six saints done with the idea of natural light entering from the main entrance.
Yes. So let me go to, okay, this image. So, oh wait, let me go to a close-up first. Look at the way the light falls on Saint Sebastian's body, right? It's very obvious the light is falling in this direction because the rest is in shadow. Same thing with Saint Job. The light is falling from here because the rest is in shadow. Now, with the location of the painting, when you enter, let's look at the exterior of the church. There are windows here. So light does enter from this side, the natural light. And you would look towards the altarpiece with the light, natural light entering from the right. So it does take that into consideration, yes.
And then we'll close with the last comment that says that, one second, there are some. Okay, there's one question about, I don't know, it's sort of a comparative question. It says, Naina asks that this reminds her of Zachariah's altarpiece.
Yes. So there are affinities. That's also by Bellini. That is also a sacra conversazione. Well, that has compartments. The dating of some of Bellini's religious works is problematic, including the San Giobbe altarpiece, because they're not always documents. Okay, so on stylistic grounds, and his style is not something that he learned. He devised something new and then he started using it. He adapted the style to the commission. So I can't remember right now the dating of the San Zaccaria altarpiece, but I think it's after this. Okay, even though it is compartmentalized. So this is conceptually a unified space that is more retro, if you will, with individual spaces. But his application of paint would be as realistic as it is in this altarpiece.
And the original painting is where now?
This one is in the Galleria dell'Accademia. So about a 10-minute walk from St. Mark's Cathedral.
Sushma had asked that question, Sushma Kochari. And what kind of ideals did Giovanni represent in his paintings generally that he wanted people to know? Was there anything particular? And Rahul Kamble asked, was he particularly religious, Giovanni Bellini? In terms of, did his painting
just one
represent
sec. I'll answer those. I don't know if he was particularly religious. I'm going to guess he was. Most Italians were, and he had a reputation of being a very nice person. Okay, so not one of those cutthroat people. The artist Albrecht Dürer visited Venice twice, and he was very touched by the warmth with which he was greeted by Bellini, who was a rival artist, if you will. Okay, so he was whether that's connected to his religious convictions, I would assume yes. That's one thing. I want to say something about the previous answer I gave. I might have mixed up the San Zaccaria altarpiece with another one, because now that I'm thinking of it, I think the San Zaccaria altarpiece is also a unified space. So just cancel what I said earlier. I'll have to look at the images to, I'm blanking out. What was the other question?
The other question was, that was in the question answer section. It said that, what kind of ideals did Giovanni represent in his painting generally? Was there anything particular he wanted people to know in terms of his ideas or ideals, or was it just whatever the patrons asked him to paint? Or did he have a leaning towards a certain type of subject?
Definitely he would have to paint whatever the painters asked him to paint. So just one sec before I answer that question. This is the San Zaccaria altarpiece. It is a unified space. The difference between the San Zaccaria altarpiece and the one we looked at right now, so this is the Sacra Conversazione, please ignore what I said earlier, is if you look carefully at this, let's see if this one, can you see this blue part here? So it seems to be the fictive space that Bellini has depicted in this work seems to be not an interior space, but a hybrid space with.
Yeah, we can't see it. We can only see the chapel.
Oops. Okay, hang on. Let me just. Am I not sharing my screen? I'm not, apparently. I'm sorry, just one sec. Okay, tell me when you can see it.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so let me just. Yeah, I was thinking of a different altarpiece. I'm forgetting the name of that. So can you see trees in the background here and a blue sky and clouds?
Yes.
Okay, so this is also a Sacra Conversazione. You have an enthroned Virgin and Child flanked by saints, but the space here is very different. So this is how this is the San Giobbe altarpiece evokes a specific physical place, the interior of the Basilica of St. Mark. This evokes an imagined space. Okay.
But that was a lovely
I'm sorry.
association. Yeah.
Yeah, Anupam, I forgot what was the other question. Something about the Giovanni Bellini's. What was it? His.
Yeah, like. I'll read the question. What kind of ideas or ideals did Giovanni represent in his paintings generally that he wanted people to know?
I'll just take that instead of ideals as topics, because I wouldn't know how to answer it otherwise. The basic themes, early works, a lot of religious works. And the topics of the religious works would have come from the patrons. Okay, he might have, the compositions would have been his, but probably it would be the patrons who would tell him, these are the saints we want. So, and then he would go from there. That would be for any artist, not just him. Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Later on in his career, he was commissioned for several official paintings. So there are some works that he has done on canvas that are even in the Ducal Palace. They're not amongst his most extraordinary works. There are a few portraits. The portrait of Doge Leonardo Loredan is exceptionally beautiful. And there are secular mythological paintings too, the loves of the gods, things like that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Reshma. Thank you very much for this. And thank you to the Italian Cultural Center With your kind permission, Reshma will close the talk for today.
Yeah.
And the questions were they were very, very sharp, and they led to a lot of further knowledge that Reshma could share with us. So thank you very much, and keep them coming. And we look forward to the next talk. Reshma, could you just tell us quickly what the topic of your next talk would be after?
It's something I didn't mention because I didn't want to digress, but Giovanni Bellini's sister was married to Andrea Mantegna. And the next talk is on one of Mantegna's series of canvases depicting, it's called the Triumphs, plural, of Caesar, but it's actually the series together depicts a single triumph of Caesar, a triumphal procession of Caesar. So that's what that series of paintings is what I'll be talking about the next time.
We look forward to that. And there are a lot of students today, Reshma, who are studying museology. So, and
I'm sorry,
there are a lot of
physiology?
students, museology, museums.
What is that? I'm sorry. I'm
A study of museums.
museology. Okay, sorry.
Museology.
Yes, of course.
So just wanted to tell them that seeing the representations of the painting, seeing the way they've been positioned as altarpieces in the apses, if you see the way the entire the church is embellished, so the chapel is embellished, it is all about composition. It is all, everything is designed. It is all about
Yes.
display, because these students were studying display today, earlier on in the day.
Okay.
And this is a really classic example how display plays such an important part in also honoring the work. It is not just to showcase it, but I think it shows a certain amount of respect that you give to the artwork, the way you
Yeah, an
position it.
acknowledgement of its original purpose. So I'll just mention that somebody had asked about, the in situ thing. Very important to keep in mind when you display any work, that very few people coming are going to know about its original context. So if in the label or the literature, you can just have some reference to that, it's often very helpful, because for those who are interested, with the internet today, there's so much you can do. It's, I think, a great practice if that could be inculcated in and incorporated into wall texts, original locations, and any particular aspect that might be relevant to the way it would have been viewed originally.
Excellent. So then, Reshma, thank you very, very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, goodbye, and see you in 2 weeks. Excellent.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Good
Happy
night.
New
Bye.
Year. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.